correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPG, the podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. Hey folks, what's up? Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. I'm Steve, and I'm the only official Steve here tonight. However, I do have a good friend of the show and someone who you've heard quite a bit of joining me tonight. That would be Eric, who you may recognize as Pranglar from our Oblivion War actual play, and various other characters he's had in some of our other actual plays. So, hello, Eric.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
So, yes, the other Steve is busy and schedules didn't line up, so I got Eric to come and have a ramble with me tonight and all that fun stuff. So, before we get going, I'm going to take a minute here, another podcast on the D20 Radio Network. And the one we'll talk about this week is a podcast called The Genesis Archive, which is it's an actual play podcast. Everything that I know they've put out, they've used the Genesis engine, which again, our Oblivion War series and all that. Really cool game. But most of their stuff is in a setting of their GM's design called the Unseen World, which is, I would call it modern urban fantasy, with a lot of heavy, like, folkloric influence and stuff. And, of course, it's set in Las Vegas, which, look, I've said this for years about, like, the original CSI. Setting it in Vegas was brilliant because you can just pull anything in because it's Vegas, other than maybe snow.
Yeah, that's about the one thing. There's all kinds of weird stuff that happens there. So
Yeah, but it's really good. And also, when we had their GM and Jonathan, we had their GM Jonathan on one time a long time ago, and it turns out Vegas is actually his hometown. So he's not even, he knows actual Vegas, not just
the Strip.
TV and media Vegas.
Yeah.
So, like I said, it's a very good show. Really good role play. There are a bunch of, be it writers, performance-oriented people, actors, whatever, I don't know exactly. But I haven't listened to it in a while, but when I did listen to it, it's, again, very, very good. So if you're into that kind of thing, that modern urban fantasy type stuff, very, very cool.
It's on my list to check out.
Yeah, it's and they've got a lot of content that you can go through. So this week, I kind of wanted to have a chat around, right, we hear all the time, what kind of game is it, right? Is it a narrative game? Is it this blah, blah, blah? Well, one, narrative, I don't think is a good word to describe a game. And here's why. Because what we're really doing in most cases with a role-playing game is we're telling a story. Thus, it's all narrative.
Right.
But so I'm thinking about, like what other things can we use? The one that I've heard bounced around a lot, simulationist. And most people use that to talk about games that are typically a bit more crunchy, are really much more, what would you say, trying to simulate the real, air quotes here, real world things that are happening in the game, which is, of course, great fun when you're playing all kinds of sci-fi and magic and whatever.
Yep.
And I think we'll get into this further down the road. The second category, I'm going to call them emulative. And when I looked up in the dictionary, the definition of emulate or emulation, it basically is just another way to say imitate. But I think in the dictionary, simulate and emulate aren't exactly synonyms, but they're not that far off. But simulate to me has more of a statistical modeling type connotation to it, where emulate to me is more like you're trying to get a feeling. It's supposed to feel like the thing, not necessarily be the thing or look like the thing or act like the thing. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yep. With a simulation, I kind of think of you need to count your rounds. You need to figure out what the weight is of the stuff you're carrying. You need to figure out how far the distance is. But emulation is you get the idea of the setting and you get the feel of trying to, suss out a specific thing. Maybe like a little bit like Mutant City Blues feels a little emulationist, not simulationist to me.
Mhm.
Just because it emulates a police drama narrative game. I'm
Mhm.
trying to get away from narrative, but I'm trying to figure out. I don't remember the word that I'm trying to figure out. But
No, in that context, I think that's the proper word to use, right? Because it's describing the narrative of the game. You're not saying the game is narrative per se,
yeah, exactly.
and then I would call the 3rd category, and I don't really know what because to me, this kind of encompasses a lot of stuff, but we're talking the the silly little compact games, be it even from Havoc Brigade, which with all the stuff that you get with it is like 20 pages, but 6 pages of that is pre-gens, there's cover art. So there's not a lot of rules to that game. But
Right.
even down to, some of the one-page stuff that we played, not all of it got recorded. Like you ran that heavy metal wizard sorcerers game,
Yep.
which was great fun, but there's virtually no rules. And so I'm gonna call that category minimalist because I don't know of a better word. But I think also in a lot of ways though, in a lot of these OSR designs are minimalist, but with a simulationist leaning.
Right.
So like these, I don't think these titles are by any mean these labels, if you want to call them that, are by any means exclusive. But like I think too, right? I don't know about you, Eric, but I play different games differently.
Yes. Absolutely.
If you put me at we'll say a 5e table with a bunch of people who are really into their bonuses, math brain, analysis, manipulate things brain comes in on me and I start going, well, if I do this and this and this, I can combine them and make this wonderful little firestorm of whatever it is that I'm trying to do. Witness one of the last 5e characters I played was what the heck was I don't even remember his name now. Wargle, maybe? But anyway, he was a halfling barbarian, but he was dex-based instead of strength-based,
Hmm. Yep.
which so when the concept came to mind, and I'm just going and then I had this image in my head of Robin Williams when he comes out of the portal in Jumanji, mixed
Yep.
with, um, Steve Irwin
Okay.
and a touch of remember the old Australian doctor, I think his name was Jack on MASH, was only on for a couple episodes, like the very first season,
Yep.
but kind of a melding of those 3.
Okay. All right.
But so and again, because this is table I was at was a little bit into the technical and the this and that, so I realized that with a couple of tweaks and a couple of feats, I made this amazing little bouncing ball of chaos. Now, the one thing that you don't get with that build is you don't get the strength because rules is written and I don't know, maybe they've changed it in the whatever they call the new 5e, but your rage damage bonus only applies to strength-based weapons.
Yes.
So, because he was dex-based, he's a halfling, I went, finesse-based because, I mean, why not, right? It works for a halfling. But what I did and when I played that character, he was coming in at about level 5 or 6, because my previous character had gotten killed, and, so I took, like, a level or 2 of fighter, but I took the, what the heck is the feat? Sentinel. Now,
Yeah.
everyone thinks and I'm g you know 5e reasonable. Sentinel, most people think of it as, "Oh, wait, when they try to move," or, it's if they try to move and I take my attack of opportunity, it stops them moving.
Correct.
That
Yep.
wasn't at all why I took it.
Yeah.
Further down in the description, and I forget the exact wording of it, but essentially, if someone adjacent to you and not adjacent to anyone else who has the Sentinel feat makes an attack against anyone other than you can take an attack of opportunity.
Yes.
So, yes, I'm giving up my strength damage. I was making that up by one, because of a halfling, I have incredible mobility as far because you can move through occupied spaces. I had stupid AC, reasonably high AC because Dex Con, as a barbarian, I was now stacking Dex and Con to AC. And then, of course, I think I was Totem Barb. So I had, go ahead, hit me. I don't care.
Right.
And con, that's the other thing you can add in or something. I don't anyway. But yeah, it was basically his whole thing was not to necessarily hit you hard. It was to be this annoying little pest that if you didn't pay attention to him, he was just going to keep poking you to death.
Yeah, just barb, 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 barb.
Right, but and while it was fun to play that character, that's a completely different mentality than, like, to go to Oblivion where how I was playing Karlax, where Karlax is just different in his own way, but, like, I don't play Genesis the same way I play D&D.
Yeah, nor would you play Havoc Brigade that same way either.
Right. I think Genesis is very much it's an emulation system by the fact that it's trying to emulate a specific style of narrative.
Mhm,
It is designed to do heroic cinematic action. I mean,
correct.
it was Star Wars.
Yeah,
That's what Star Wars and that to me, that's the genius of that system because so many of us wanna play that kinda game. Gumshoe, like you mentioned us playing Mutant City Blues, again, it's going to emulate, by and large, investigative drama.
yes.
There are various flavors of it. I know, I think they have the 2nd edition of they call it Trail of Cthulhu,
Okay.
is on BackerKit or Kickstarter or something right now. And it's a really neat system, but, like now here's the other thing. Well, I'll get to that. You're used to my attention span.
Mhm.
But it does what it does well, but it doesn't do other things well. I think Powered by the Apocalypse probably falls into this emulationist type thing because, again, they're taking a very Fate, a lot of those games. I don't know. Is this make any sense to you?
It does, like, I think Morkborg would fall kinda in between the lines, right? So Morkborg's one of those ones that it does have some emulationist aspects to it because 'cause you're trying to fulfill certain roles in certain stories, but there's not many rules to Morkborg, right?
Right.
So I think, as you said before, some of the lines get blurred with some of these. For example, I find Shadowrun to
Mhm.
be a very simulationist game because you have so many bits and bobs that you need to worry about, and you need to count your ammo, and you need to spend time training to level up, and you need to have this right thing to go with this right thing, and put the scope on your gun, and make sure you have this thing hardwired in, and there's a lot of moving parts to that game.
Mhm.
But in the same aspect, it's crunchy from that standpoint, but it's trying to give you the feel of corporate espionage and things like that. So, well, it's trying to also do the virtual combat, which is something I feel should be a core to it, but it always feels clunky, right? So the you want to be a nut, you know,
What do
a
they call
hacker in that game, right?
Yeah, I forget what it's called now, but I know what you're talking about.
So basically, you would think that would be a big part of it and something that they would focus on and do very well, but it's like you're playing 3 different roles in it, right? So that's played in the virtual well. You could have people that are magic users that play in
The Ethereal.
the ethereal world, and then you have the real. So you can actually play 3 different scenes, and it has like simulationist things in that, but where some of those aren't necessarily very tangible currently. Like, it's hard to picture what the virtual and hard to picture what the ethereal worlds are. So they might kind of try to be emulationist in that aspect of these are theoretical areas.
Mhm.
So we have to do it that way.
Yeah, well, I think you hit on something there, though, and this, you know, uh, I mean, I'm a pretty big fan of the cyberpunk titles from Martel Sorian, but the one big thing has always been the hacking rules, and I think this applies to Shadowrun because the first edition of Shadowrun came out within months of with initial version of Cyberpunk, the first version was actually called Cyberpunk 2013,
Mhm.
but that came out in I think '87 because 2020 released in '88.
Yeah, it was real,
Um, but,
real
like,
early.
so they were trying to have these rules for hacking and net running and all this stuff. That was before the internet that has been ubiquitous for, what, 35 years now, probably? That was before all that.
Yeah.
Like, it was right before the internet, at least for the general public, took off.
Yeah, I just played a trivia game tonight. I think they said '89 was when the internet started, and that was one of the questions of it.
Okay. Yeah, I was guessing, but, like, I know, like, I remember, like, web crawler and Yahoo search and whatnot being a thing when I went to college in the mid-90s, and like, but that was kind of the early days of it as far as a lot of people using it. Or, that was as it was kind of becoming the World Wide Web, not just, "Oh, you have the internet at your house?"
Yep.
or at your school or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, and so these people were just trying to design a game of something that they didn't have the frame of reference that we look back and look, how many people that you play games with or I play games with, they've known that their whole life.
Right. There's never been a time where they haven't had the internet.
Right, and so to kind of, that's where especially for the, 2020 or the early editions of Shadowrun, I almost give them a pass on the fact that those rules are clunky because there wasn't anything to base it on.
Right, it was science fiction at that point for the
Well, I
most
mean,
part.
you had the phone freakers, but how do you make that a game?
Right. Yep. Yeah, that's something I never considered before, and that's a good point because it's like that there was like direct connection sometimes to other things, but like you said, it wasn't the World Wide Web and all of that. So it was you could connect digitally, remotely to other people and it might be certain people. It might not, it couldn't be necessarily everybody.
Mhm.
So that is an interesting thing to bring up as part of that is so is that that's maybe at that point it was an emulationist game and
I
became a simulation game eventually.
well, okay. I don't know, you've played, I know, The Witcher, which is built on the same core engine that Cyberpunk 2020 is. I don't know if you ever actually played 2020.
I haven't. I'm actually in a Witcher game now, so that
Okay, but it's
same
the
system
same
though.
core mechanics. To me, that is a very simulationist engine.
Yes.
Pondsmith has even said as much. I think for the case of Cyberpunk 2020, a game that came out in the late '80s, it's an incredibly well-designed game. Is it crunchy and has weird bits? Yes. But and see, this is where people wanna say, "Is this better? Is that better?" I don't know. It depends on how you play, right? Like, I like what the crunch of Cyberpunk 2020 gives me. Cyberpunk Red is a solid modernizing of that game, in my opinion. It sort of, for me, though, almost hits that weird middle ground where it doesn't feel enough either way that I'm kind of like, I really like what they did with the roles, or they call them roles, not classes, but for generic term speak, we'll call them classes.
Sure.
The way they redid those for Red is great. They made them a lot more balanced, a lot more useful broadly to your average player, we'll say. But there's something for me that the grit and the brutality of that engine really kind of, in some ways though, it helps emulate a feel. So there is like this weird interplay between all these things, and like you you've probably played more Genesis narrative dice, whatever, than I have. I don't think that the narrative dice could give you that gritty, brutal feel that, like, because I've read part of The Witcher, and 2020 is brutal. Witcher just cranks it up.
Yeah.
And I don't think Genesis is, I know out of the box it's not capable of that.
Right.
It might be with the right tweaks, but if you're gonna put that much time into tweaking it, why not just play the thing that's already written?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Genesis definitely it's very difficult to die in Genesis or become grievously injured. You have to stack up a bunch of crits to basically do that. And I think that's like you said, partially by design because it's more focused on telling a continuous story.
Right.
Is there danger involved with that? Is there a potential that, you know, you could die or you could lose a limb? Sure. It needs very extenuating circumstances to do that. So it just wants you to push the story forward, usually in the focus of the heroic characters or the main characters. Let's say if you're playing, Edge of the Empire, you're not necessarily good guys, you're scum of the galaxy, but um it's meant more to be an emulation of that world as opposed to a direct simulation.
Right, but I think even more, it's an emulation of the genre when you take it to Genesis, right?
Yeah.
It is designed to be very cinematic, but where your main characters are going to continue. Because look at how many. what was it? We were watching an episode of Blue Bloods the other day while we were eating lunch, and the 2 Reagan brothers were trying to defuse this bomb on this person. And I'm joking with my wife. I said, "Well, they're basically title characters. They're not killing off 2 in one scene,
Right.
which means they're gonna defuse it."
Yep. They have plot
You know what I
armor.
mean? But that's kind of the thing, right? Like, Genesis is great for that feel in Star Wars, and I know they're not the same, but for this discussion, I think they are because we're talking about what the engine's designed to do, not the mechanics per se. But
Right.
you're right, and this is where so Cyberpunk, in a sense, I think, that engine, I forget what it's called now, but anyway, um Interlock, that's what they call that system. It's designed to provide the feel by, like, technical sim you know, tweaking probabilities and all that stuff, where emulative games like Genesis, I think Cortex probably falls into that case. I would argue, actually, that's probably where World of Darkness falls, although you probably have more experience with that than I do.
Yeah, World of Darkness is very emulative. It's not super crunchy, right? So there's your basic, you get skill plus stat plus a D10 that potentially explodes. Very similar to, actually similar to the 2020 and Witcher systems from a mechanic standpoint.
Sort of,
Um, sort of. There
but
are some
mixed
other
with
things.
Shadowrun.
Yeah, yep, exactly.
Which
So
actually, that's who did the dice mechanics for that, was someone from the Shadowrun team.
okay, that makes sense. Like I picked up, and I'd love to run at some point the newest edition of Werewolf, which goes back to the original, like, well, not original, but like second edition Werewolf. It kind of brings back some of those roots. It resets the storyline of it, so it's not a progression of the story like second 2.0 World of Darkness was.
Mhm,
It brings it back and kinda reboots it almost, changes some of how the, tribes work and things like that, but the core system is very similar, so you get the feel of what it is like to be in a moot of werewolves that are from different tribes, right? So it kinda has some of that political play. It's very most of the World of Darkness have very political pieces to them, along with some combat, right? So combat's somewhat crunchy, because you can have brutal combats in all of the World of Darkness systems, but it doesn't necessarily, you don't like upgrade a bunch of weapons and get bogged down in the minutia. It's kind of fairly quick and dirty combat because it's fairly deadly, and that's one of the things that emulationist stuff does is I feel is like, Witcher does this. Witcher is very fast combats. Either you're gonna win or you're gonna probably get maimed, right? That's how it works. You're gonna like, and then you're gonna need 3 weeks to heal.
you're going to maim or be maimed.
Yeah. So while there are some similarities between them, the werewolf side of things, you have a healing factor. So it usually just says, okay, you're healed and you're good to go. So that's kind of the where those lines blur. And it's a very, very minor difference, right? Where we
Mhm,
talked earlier, Witcher is kind of more of a simulationist because there's a lot of minutia. You need to gather a bunch of ingredients to craft things, and you need, like, for example, you were talking about simulationist was one of the examples that is in The Witcher. Craftsmen or doctors, to even witchers, they need to scrounge for ingredients to potentially make other ingredients to make either a potion or mutagen or craft items because you can make any armor in there, but you need a bunch of things and you have to really scrounge for them. So, like, one of the interesting things to that in simulationist is comparative to like D&D, you basically loot the body, you get some gold, you might get their weapons.
mhm.
And a lot of times when you get higher levels in D&D, what do you do with their basic weapons?
You either sell them or just, forget that they're on your character sheet.
Yep. In The Witcher, you take those, you disassemble them, bring them down to their components to make other things. So your actual, like, regular items and, plants and animal parts and things like that are all your loot, which you use for crafting. So a lot of the it's a very minutia type of system. So that's where it's more simulationist, where you would go out and look for things to create other things with, as opposed to Genesis or any of those systems where, yes, you have some of that, but you're given a lot of the things to do the things with,
Mhm.
because your main point is to look at how, I guess, how it feels, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I know, I think that, like, to a certain point, and I know this isn't in the dictionary definition of emulate, but the M to start it off in my mind goes to emotion, whatever, so it's more going for a feel,
Yep.
just and it's asking you to do that from the start, where I think a simulationist game is enforcing that by the rules.
Yeah, there's very specific ways to do it.
And we've had the conversation, I know, just various chats or on the Discord or whatever, where Genesis and the narrative dice kind of just need you to think about the game differently than you would playing D&D or, you know, Witcher or whatever else, right? I
Mhm.
know Fate is very much that way. The only real experience I have with Powered by the Apocalypse is the Monster of the Week that we've played, but that again, that's going for a specific kind of feel. Even though you can do different feels, there's still kind of like a core conceit to it that you have to buy into. Like I said, I think I said, Fate that way. Minimalist games sort of some of them I think are, so to speak, like Heavy Metal Wizard Sorcerers was complete total minimalist emulation, I think.
Yep.
Because it basically went, here's a premise, do stuff with it. And that was about it.
Yeah.
You know, uh, Honey Heist, you have Bear and you have Criminal. Well, okay, whatever, right? Lasers and peelings, those type of things.
Sure.
Um, but I think, you did like you mentioned, we talked about Witcher and that engine a little bit. Another game that I know I've just started playing in a campaign locally in person, I know you played it, is Earth Dawn. And I
Yes.
think Earth Dawn kind of, to me, encapsulates the idea of a simulationist game that uses the rules to make the world vivid.
Mhm.
Much like some of what you're describing with The Witcher, but like Earth Dawn and now I will say I did actually create a first edition Earth Dawn character back in my college days. Never got to play it. Then I got to play it this past year with Brett
Mhm.
at Gamer Nation Con, and I went, "Wow." Now he played a kind of a quick and dirty version at the con. We didn't actually use the steps modification for rolls. We were just doing like if you got +2 steps, you took a +2 to the roll.
Okay.
Mathematically, that's actually how the steps work and all that. But
Right.
the game I'm playing in here locally, no, we're doing the whole steps thing. But and I think you having played it, that world is so rich and deep and every the system for as goofy and as weird and as kind of crunchy as it is makes perfect sense in the context of that world. But damn it, I don't know that I would use that system to play in any other world, but I don't know. And again, now Brett did a Genesis conversion for Earth Dawn, but I'll get into why I think that, in addition to the fact that he was coming to it from a perspective of having played a lot of Earth Dawn,
Right.
but I think there's a mechanical reason that the narrative dice might actually pull it off. But so, like I said, and it's a weird enough system for anyone that's not played it. I'm not going to try to explain it, but essentially, your dice change and get bigger as you get better at things.
Yep.
Is the short way to say it.
And it has heavy use of D12s.
Yes, D12. It has heavy use of everything but
Mm.
D4s, really.
Right. Yep. Unless you're really bad at something.
Well, yes, but all dice explode, so D4s are only sort of bad.
Yep.
And but so 2 reasons. One reason I think that Genesis actually may work okay for Earth Dawn. The lead dev for 4th edition describes Earth Dawn as hopeful post-apocalyptic fantasy.
Yep.
That hopeful thing is where I think Genesis has an in. And part of the idea behind Earth Dawn is you're building the legend of your characters, so you'd like them to survive. Again, like you were saying, it's kind of hard to die in Genesis without trying, but you get lots of cool moments that build legend. But here's the thing, and had I, time shift things, would have been curious to ask Jay Little about this when we interviewed him a couple years back. If you think about it, the narrative dice system actually works very much like the step system.
Yes, because
You upgrade dice, you add dice.
yes.
I
The only
mean,
thing
that's
it doesn't
very
do is explode.
right, but you have triumph and despair.
Right.
So, it's and I know I'm very oversimplifying things in that explanation, but at its core, it's still adding and upgrading dice, which is kind of what the step system does.
It does. The I think, but to your point earlier, the step system is also kinda what makes it simulationist as well.
Yes,
So would you consider Earth Dawn and Genesis then more emulative than simulationist? Uh,
probably.
so that's an interesting thing is you could take a world, change a system, and it becomes a different feel, right? While the world itself may be the same and you can use the same narrative aspects to it and the same, lore and all of that, the system really drives how those games feel.
Mhm.
So
Well, let me ask you this, just based on, your experience in the conversation. Would you try to play The Witcher in Genesis?
I know you talked about that before because you were
I
looking to
mentioned
try
it,
to
but
do that. I would give it a try. It would definitely not feel as brutal as The Witcher does. Like, combats don't last long, and they are very decisive in it. I think that the feel of a Witcher game in Genesis would be very different from the feel of a Witcher game in the current system.
mhm,
It would feel you would wanna do the more story-driven thing and less combat. That's the other thing is that The Witcher has some investigative pieces to it as well, right?
mhm,
So, you could do that certainly with the Genesis side of it. So if you wanted to make a more investigative game, I would say that oddly enough, it would be difficult to do not difficult, it would feel different to have a Witcher as a Witcher in Genesis as opposed to in The Witcher itself.
mhm. And now I will say too, my only exposure to The Witcher, I've never played the games, I've never read the books. I did watch the first couple seasons of the Netflix show. To me, what I see on screen in that is not the images I'm gonna get from a Genesis game. Now, how true that is to the games or the novels, I have no clue.
Yeah.
But
I haven't read the novels myself, but the games are fairly close. There's a lot of collecting, there's a lot of fast combats, like you're either gonna win quick or you're gonna die quick. The like I'm actually since we started playing, I started playing The Witcher 3 video game, and
mhm,
it has very similar feels and the one aspect I think it would do very well is that there are a lot of things in The Witcher that aren't always what they seem.
mhm,
It also has a very clean, for me, social combat system, which is very similar to the physical combat system. So I think that it can port into there if you wanted to do a social combat system.
mhm.
The other one it may port well into, which is also a very emulationist game as opposed to a simulationist game, is like L5R.
Okay.
It has similar dice system. There'll be familiar concepts to Genesis, but
Mhm,
it doesn't have successes are always the thing that matter. Usually it's called opportunity. I made that mistake in the Genesis game in one of the episodes because I was playing an L5 R game at that time, but you look for more of the opportunity because it's more of a storytelling, like because there's courtier stuff, and I think it might work in that because in L5R combat is very quick and deadly because it's a samurai duel essentially is what happens with
mhm.
most of that. So it may be easier to fit The Witcher into L5R than it is to Genesis.
Yeah, like, and I but I was like, I was just more but like you said, Witcher as the role-playing game has a very distinct feel, but I think it's achieved maybe that's what we're talking about, right? Is how do they achieve what so then what? Simulation is doing it by rules, emulation is doing it kind of by structure, and minimalist is just trying to going, no, just do it yourself."
Yep, minimalist is do what you want and figure out the bits yourself of how you want it to work and get there. So I think that's a good point, right? So I think the system does have a lot on how those things are defined. You can make a game in each of those systems, but I think they will all feel very different based on, like, you could take the same setting and put it in each of those systems, and they would all feel very different based on how the system works with it.
Yeah. No, like I said, this is just kind of thoughts that have been rolling around my head as to, like, are we and I don't know what good does it do to but, like, maybe if you think about it this way, you can better describe what it is you're trying to do in a game or what you wanna get out of a game to the rest of your table, be it as a GM or as a player. And maybe, if you're a GM, right, like, okay, what is the thing I wanna focus on in my game? Does that affect what system I wanna pick? And I think this is gonna lead into a bigger discussion about, does system matter? Or probably more, how much does system matter? Because I think it does, but, and that discussion doesn't need to happen tonight, because we're already 40 minutes in. But I just think if maybe if we kind of think about things and look at them from a different angle, it can help us. The other thing, okay, this just literally popped into my head, right? If you understand, okay, we're playing Cyberpunk or Witcher, or we're playing a simulationist game. I can go, okay, as a GM, I've got the rules to help enforce the tone.
Yep.
I don't have to think about enforcing the tone by, how I spend threat, or what sort of obstacles I just randomly pop up in the way of the characters. Like it's say a gumshoe game, how convoluted are the clues, or whatever, right?
Yep.
The rules are there to do that for you.
Correct.
You
Yep.
know, Emulation probably requires a little more, like, in some ways it's handing you the opportunity, but it's not necessarily giving you the thing to do. So it's more freeing in a way, but it's more like buying a cake mix or a recipe.
Yeah. And would you say that each of those levels, so starting with the simulationist, it's more on the DMGM, the person running the game, to set that tone, and the farther down you go on that list, it's more up to the players to set that tone?
Broadly, I don't think that's inaccurate. I don't think it's ever exclusively on the players. Well, it I think it probably that slider probably moves that direction, because 'cause we'll go to Havoc Brigade, which I know you played with me, and we actually did record that, and that may start coming out here soon because Oblivion War is. I think I've got one more play session to edit of that. But in my experience playing and I've run Havoc Brigade 4 or 5 times at conventions now, and it always is different because it's very much driven by the players. But I also will tell people, look, at a certain point, for me at least, when I'm GMing Havoc Brigade, a couple hours into the game, the rules start going out the window.
Yep.
And it's more like I'm just having you at some point, and I know this happened in the games that I ran at Gamer Nation Con, it really became a contest of how many dice can we stack into the pot,
Yeah.
you know, and what bonkers thing can we do that is going to be the coolest? And at that point, it's almost at the point of I'm not trying to stop you from doing it. I'm going to see how many successes you got relative to how big a handful of dice and that's a lot of successes or it's not. And it's more, how spectacular is the antic going to be, not did you successfully antic.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
A little preview when we played, it was like herding cats trying to get to the MacGuffin because we just like to do all of the things.
well, but that is Havoc Brigade in a nutshell. Like, I've described it, and actually, so I don't think I've gotten to tell you this. I ran that last year at our local convention, PGX, which was, well, now almost 2 weeks ago in real time. By the time this comes out, it'll be just over 2 weeks ago. So, just over a year ago, I ran it for what turned out to be a whole home group, which was really fun because they already are kind of familiar with playing off each other, and in that game, that just I mean, it's even better, right?
Mhm.
So I had that game posted to run, Friday night at PGX this year. No one showed up. No one signed up. Okay, so I got to play Vast Grim with Brian Colin, the creator, who we had on a couple episodes ago. So that was fun, and actually Steve and I both played in that game. So the next morning, I show up at the con, and I didn't have anything scheduled early in the day. So I walk over to the RPG, like the tabletop area, like coordinating table, and I'm just looking at what's there. And I actually recognize a couple of the people that played Havoc Brigade with me last year. And they're looking for a table that'll take like 8 of them.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, I said, look, I said, I'm just going to offer this. You don't have to, it doesn't hurt my feelings or any which way. I said, if you want, I have the stuff with me. I could run Havoc Brigade for you again. You're just going to have duplicates because I only have six different characters. I had multiples of sheets because it's such a quick, easy pickup game. They're like, oh, heck yeah. So I literally had 4 or 5 of the same people that of the 6 that played with me last year, plus some more of their home group, play the same game. Now I used a different plot hook, but that game is not at all about the plot hook.
No.
It's
Definitely
like
about the journey.
yeah, right. And so, but like, and I think so. Yeah, I think maybe that's you kind of hit on it. As in the heavy simulationist side, the tone is system and GM, and as you move down the line, it probably does become more of player, but the GM has to move with it, right? Like,
Right.
because Havoc Brigade, you can't. There are things that are going to happen in Havoc Brigade that there are no rules for. Now, mind you, there really aren't many rules in that game in the first place.
Yes.
The one game I ran at Gamer Nation, they had an in-character drinking game.
That they just went with, right?
So they're like, well, how do we do this? And I, what I said, I think too, that was the second session of Havoc Brigade I'd run that day. And I will just say this, as much as I love that game and I love GMing it, running 2 con sessions of that game in the same day, not the best idea I ever had.
It's a lot.
It is. It's I would equate GMing Havoc Brigade. And to be fair, I did some things differently than I probably should have in the game that we recorded. I kind of tried to manage it a little more, but I've learned, especially in cons, GMing that game is kind of like riding an inner tube down a hill of ice.
You just have to steer it a little bit, but it's going.
You point it, and then you hang on and try to avoid the trees.
Yep. Yeah. That is definitely what that game is.
And look, I'm not going to speak for you. I will say, having GM'd it like 5 times now at conventions, it is a blast. It really is.
Yeah, I had a good time with it as well. Like, I don't know, just chucking goblins everywhere. It's always a good
Yes,
time.
yeeting goblins was a problem-solving scheme.
Yes, it was. It worked well sometimes. Sometimes we ran out of goblins.
But like I said, I was just thinking that this topic might kind of like be something that people can think about in terms of how to pick what game it is you want to run, in terms of how to describe to your players what you want out of them, or how to ask your GM what they want out of you, or tell your GM what you want from them, right? Like, it's all a big circle.
Yeah, it's a good session 0 topic actually to set the tone, right? So, and figure out even like maybe pre-session 0, like trying to figure out what type of game you want to play, right?
Mhm.
If I think this is a good starting point for anybody, how crunchy do you want it? How system driven do you want it? Do you want it more story driven? And do you want to be like an open world, or do you want it to be, kind of, I don't want to say on the rails, but very
A
directed, right?
pathway.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. It's a really good point. So, all right, you got anything more you want to add for this?
No, I think we covered pretty well. That's
Yeah.
good discussion on.
Cool. Thank you. So, just because I'll ask, do you have anything going on that you'd like to throw a plug in since you're technically a guest? I don't know that you have anything going on, but you might.
No, I wish I was that important to plug something, but this is this is the first guest spot I've had on a podcast, so I don't have anything to plug or promote.
Okay. Well, with that, then, you know what time it is.
Game of the week.
Give it a week.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
All right. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Why don't you go first?
All right. So I'm gonna half cheat, and I think I may have used this one previously, but I'm going to put the link up in the green room so you can click to it.
Okay.
This is the other game that I ran at PGX this year.
Oh, yeah.
And I know, those of you who have been around the Discord, whatever, have heard me talk about Slay Industries. I finally got to run the quick start for the second edition, almost 2 weeks ago, 2 weekends ago, we'll call it, at PGX. And Steve actually played with me. And today he actually messaged me and goes, he says, ever since I left PGX, I keep thinking, I need to play more Slay Industries. So Slay Industries is a game, I would say it definitely falls more simulationist, just because we were just talking about that, right?
Hmm.
But it's a game, and they coined their own term to describe the world and the genre, which normally is a thing that I don't want to say it turns me off, but it's kind of one of those, oh, okay, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, the term that they use, because I used to describe it as kind of a heavy metal sci-cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Their term for it is splatterpunk.
Splatterpunk is good. I
It
like that
really
term.
does fit this bizarre sci-fi post-corporate dystopian thing.
Yeah, it feels like almost like the heavy metal movie.
In some way, it's like, and the other, like it think of what you would happen if you mixed the world of cyberpunk, advanced actually, here's how I'll kind of describe the world as it comes to mind. Think about what Coruscant might look like 200 years after the Emperor won.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? That's that, but, like, it's this bizarre technically, there's multiple planets, although everything pretty much happens in Mort City, which is kind of the central thing. You play these weird, some cases genetically engineered combat monsters. But then layered on top of all of this is this idea that to keep the populace they've discovered that the populace in this world love watching, we'll call it reality TV, a la Cops, we'll call it.
Hmm.
So the whole conceit of this game is you are operative teams going in to solve problems, and as you get better, you'll actually get filmed, and you can become basically reality TV stars.
Okay.
But they manipulate, everything is manipulated. So, there's an actual in-world thing in this game called the bullet tax, because what they found is for ratings, melee footage holds much more viewers than gunfights. So to encourage the operatives to use melee as opposed to guns, bullets are stupid expensive. Like you
Okay.
could buy, I'm making up numbers because I'm not going to pull out stuff and look it up, but we'll say you can buy your average medium duty pistol for $75. Another clip of ammo might cost you 30.
Yeah.
For your beginner missions, you might make 75.
Right. Yep.
So and your armor degrades and, so but the artwork too, and, I don't know if you click through on the link, but the artwork for this game is amazing, and that's actually where the game started. This is also a game, the original first edition came out in the '90s, was designed by a bunch of '90s era Scotsmen.
Yep.
So, like, think of, Thatcher era angry Scottish youths, and Dave Alsop is the primary artist for this line, and the game actually came out of sketches he had, and you might recognize that name because he's done a bunch of work actually for Wizards for Magic the Gathering,
Yep.
did some monster books for Pelgrane, I know, and his artwork for Slay is just off the charts. And, I know I've shown it to you on camera before, play sessions. The GM screen for Slay Industries is the big, if I want to sell someone on the game, I'll just open up the GM screen and go, see the two center panels? Those are all PCs.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this is one that I've had my eye on since you mentioned it before. Like, I'd love to play this at some point because it looks like exactly the type of world that I'd like to play in that I don't get to play in very much.
It is gritty, it is punishing. It's got the slimy nastiness of that, very '90s cyberpunky kind of feel to it, but with
Yep.
this kind of over the top. And the engine, so the one thing I was curious about, and I knew how the engine worked from having read the rule book a little bit and the quick start guide. The engine is kind of a mix of the Interlock or Cyberpunk 2020 engine and World of Darkness is the simplest way I can describe it. So your base success failure is determined just like you would for The Witcher or Cyberpunk 2020. Stat plus skill plus D10.
Yep.
But you also add dice, so you whenever you go to do something, you have your what they call your success die, which is your main D10. Then you automatically get 1 skill die, regardless of what you're trying to do.
Hmm.
Then you add more dice to your hand based on how many ranks you have in whatever skill. So if you're all stat and no skill, you don't get a lot of dice. The extra dice, so your success die for purposes of determining everything needs to be distinct from your other dice, which might make this game really weird to run with a dice bot.
Yep.
But anyway, that 1 die determines success or failure. The other dice, based on how many of those with the same bonuses would succeed or fail, are used for, like, basically degrees of success or failure, which in combat terms can add extra damage, so on and so forth. The one thing that we discovered that and again, for a con setting, 3 of the 4 people at the table had never played 2nd edition before. I had played 1st edition, like, twice, you know, 25, 30 years ago,
Yep.
and I don't remember how the engine worked at all. I remember the world, but their initiative system is a little bizarre in that the way it's supposed to work, you roll initiative every round, and then you declare your action lowest to highest initiative, and then you resolve back down.
Hmm. So it's like Snake almost.
Uh, I think of it almost as in first in, last out.
Right.
Which, again, from a simulationist perspective, it kind of makes sense, right? You're the quickest, you can react better to whatever. Because if you think of like, we normally kind of think of it in turn-based video game context. But if you think about how it's happening, say, in a movie, everyone starts to move, but the person with the highest initiative kind of is, for whatever reason, better able to read what's going on, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so effectively what it does is by having the highest initiative, you get to react to what everyone else seems to be doing.
Yes.
And then that part was a little weird and I got caught somewhere in the middle of something and I kind of and then we decided to just run regular initiative the rest of the night. I understand it and I think it would benefit because that would make having, using a map, some minis or a VTT, it would make the tactical elements of the game more apparent, I think.
Yes.
So again, which I think lends more to your simulationist as we were talking about. Um, but it was really fun. It's it's kind of look, when there are weapons in the game called chuckle dusters,
Yeah.
which are they're kind of like bladed brass knuckles, but they're for the really, really big genetically engineered guys, and they're devastating.
Oh,
Like
sure.
a decent damage roll will kill most unarmored humans.
Okay.
They're just there's a weapon in this game called a chain axe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I
Now,
think one of the arts, that's what a picture of it is, right? The
uh
jack-o'-lantern guy's got a big one, looks like
yeah,
anyway.
one of the oh yeah, if you go down to the read more. Yeah. So you tell me what you see in that picture because that is the chain axe.
Yeah, I see, that is kinda taken from 40K as well, right?
Oh, I'm
Um,
sure that was a heavy influence.
yep, but I see basically, like, almost Batman/Daredevil with a jack-o'-lantern, like a alien side of that. What's that movie, Judgment Day? Kinda like Judgment Day?
Uh,
Not Judgment Day, the what's the one where one day people just get to go kill people?
oh, The Purge.
Yeah, it kinda reminds me a little bit of that too. Has some of that
Okay.
influence in there.
But yeah, like this axe is think of it what we would consider in D&D terms, kind of a great axe,
Yeah,
except it's got a chainsaw running around the outside of it.
yeah. Yep, it's huge.
And that, by the way, that's Halloween Jack. He is probably the most famous in-world serial killer in the game.
That would it definitely tracks from the art.
Uh, yeah, it it's a game that almost you kind of have to see it to get the grasp of it. So, I mean, as always, there'll be links to all this in the show notes, so you can kinda go click through. But, yeah, I mean, it's a fun book to just look at the artwork, I'll be honest.
Yeah, I noticed it's on sale too now. It's
Yeah.
15 bucks on there right now.
Yeah, the PDF is on sale for the, Halloween sale, so that's for a limited time, but being as this is only, like, 2 or 3 days before this episode will go live and Halloween isn't for another couple weeks, it should still be on sale at the time this episode drops.
That would
So, I'm gonna go with that one. Like I said, even if I'm reusing it, I actually finally got to get it on the table, and so that's gonna be mine this week. It's Slay Industries 2nd edition.
excellent. The one that I picked, it just came out on Wednesday. It's a game called The Head from Fork Frenzy. I'm gonna send it to you previously. I'm putting it too.
Yeah, yeah. Did you say the head or the hedge?
The Head, Head.
Okay.
It is under the minimalist category. It is all of a cover and one page. Um,
Aha.
PDF is $2.99 currently on drive-through,
Mhm.
and this is the tagline: "Visago's body lays before you. His head is in your backpack. The labyrinth goes on forever. It's your home. It's everyone's home. Maybe you'll get out someday, but right now." You have to deliver this head to the Duchess, who dwells in the palace at the center of the labyrinth. The head is a one shot TTRPG about building the system of your own oppression. Just kidding. It's about having adventures in a big old maze. It is, it looks like a good time. As I said, it's a minimalist game. So the character creation is 4 steps, which include mostly rolling d6s and having everybody pick a different one. You re-roll if somebody has the same one. The gameplay is you go through 6 different scenes of traveling from the point you get Visago's head and his body lays before you to when you get to the Duchess. Um, the rules are fairly non-existent. You just roll a stat, and if you roll under, you succeed. If you roll over, you don't succeed. And it says very specifically, the GM writes something on your character sheet. And then if you tie, you succeed, but the GM also writes something on your character sheet. So
Okay.
it's you kind of your character changes and learns things as you go through the labyrinth. But the rules themselves are very light, very vague, and open to interpretation, and you make what you want out of it. But the thing that grabbed me about it was the compelling idea of a story-driven dungeon crawl.
Ye
Is kind of what it is. It also reminds me of the Labyrinth, that the Jim Henson, David Bowie, Jennifer Connelly movie from the 80s,
Mhm.
where there's just different things set up in the labyrinth to stop you from getting to the center. And the concept is you're one of the denizens of this labyrinth because you live here.
Mhm.
And it's kind of incumbent upon the players as to who you're going to meet. It feels like the GM is very minimally involved and just kind of nudges directions.
Mhm.
So this is another one that seems perfect for a con game. Like I said, it's for 2 to 5 players, one of them being the GM.
Mhm.
And I dig this type of thing because it just allows for a lot of silliness and craziness and just fun times, I guess, is like a light fun time.
Mhm. Now, you told me you bought this, right?
I did.
Okay. So let me ask you this, just because this is where my brain goes.
Mhm.
How easy would it be to take this and reskin it as a literal dungeon crawl, like you were saying, or as some sort of space adventure, be it a space station, or even you've got to navigate your way through a star system to get to another planet? How hard would it be to like retheme this to be something different, or is it kind of because this feels fantasy-ish to me, just
Yeah,
from what.
it is fantasy-ish, but it basically lays out a pathway of 6 scenes. You could very easily change those scenes to be different planets in the galaxy, right?
Mhm.
And then you're trying to get to the center of the galaxy where the emperor is, that you have to talk to them.
Right.
So this would be reskinned as a sci-fi, extremely easy.
Okay.
The the one thing that you'd have to manage is like, you know, what's the labyrinth part of it? So if you're in space, is it more like, is there cosmic clusters that are happening? Is there warps? Is there, different nebula that you might have to navigate? So you would still, to me, you would still kind of want to simulate that labyrinth theme in space somehow, but there
Mhm.
are ways to do that for sure. Where it literally what I gave you is the only story prompt.
Right. No,
Um,
I get that. Like, it's just this is where a lot of times I find so much value in some of these minimalist things is because they're so minimal, in a lot of ways, it's very easy to re-envision them, but keep the same because basically it's a prompt. So if we start in a different place and it's very much again, I'm guessing depending on the table to buy into it. Well,
yep,
if you say we're doing it in space instead of, a big hedge maze or whatever it is,
yep.
as long as the table it relies on the table to develop what it actually is.
Yeah, you could do this if you wanted to do it as a modern. You could do it as some sort of prison complex
Mhm.
that people live in. Like you could even do it as like post-apocalyptic
What about, like,
with that.
the thing from the end of, or was it the Russian camp in, Stranger Things?
Oh yeah, yep. It could be kind of like that. How to escape that and get out of there, the sewer complex or whatever. You could treat it as that for sure. I think you with very light amount of work and changing some things based on what genre it's in. So I think this is like a dystopian world, because the items are all modern. So like everyone rolls, you get an item. It's either a backpack with a Sago's head, a saw, a gun with one bullet, a map, a photograph, or a rat. Those are your choices.
Mhm.
And if you wanted to even get replayability out of this game, you could change those choices, right? So I
Mhm.
think um, that lends to the minimalist side of things where it's very malleable and portable.
Mhm. Well, I think that sounds cool. Imma have to pick this up too to take it apart and do something else with.
Yep. Yeah, I like it. It's like I said, all at 2.99, and the head is the name of the game, and that's my game of the week.
Alright. Well, thank you very much for stepping in as a auxiliary Steve. I don't know, given the number of times you've been on in actual plays, maybe you get, early promotion to honorary Steve? I don't know. Well, I'll have to consult with Steve, and we'll
S-
see how that works.
Stephen training.
There you go. But thank you very much. It's been a fun discussion.
Thank you
Um,
for having me. I appreciate it, and this was a good time.
oh, thank you. And, with that, remind everyone, hey, come check out our Discord. There's a link down in the show notes. If you find us amusing enough that you want to throw us a few dollars, we've got a Patreon. There's links to Facebook, which we don't do a lot with. Twitter that we do even less with. um, Discord is probably the best place to find us if you're going to actually want to interact with us. I know Eric's been there for forever.
Yep.
Um, he's been around a lot. With all that being said, like I said, come chat with us on the Discord if you want to kind of like we'll a lot of times get conversations going like this in the Discord or after the show drops, people start chiming in and things go back and forth. And I think that's what it's all about, right? Is trying to build a community where we can all learn and get different perspectives that we can use in some way to make the whole experience better.
I agree. There's some lively discussion in there, and there's civil discussions, and people. One of the skills that this group has that some people that seems to be lost on the world is how to have a discussion and disagree and still be civil to each other.
I think we generally do a pretty good job of that. I mean, look, we're people, so okay, but most of us, most of the time, know enough to go, "Oh no, I'm in a bad mood today. I'm just not going to say anything because if I do, it'll come out wrong."
Agreed. Yep.
So yeah, that come hang out with us, etc. All that being said, think just remind everybody, be kind to each other, get out there and play some RPGs.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast. On Discord at Me and Steve RPGs. And as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.